Speeding through Interstate 5, Vince Ramos and his driver need to get to the Canadian border because he had just escaped an FBI sting. In the panic, Vince grabs his phone and quickly texts his entire company to shut down all operations. See, he wasn't your average businessman. Vince had built a multi-million-dollar empire selling encrypted phones perfect for CEOs, celebrities, and politicians valuing their privacy. Except, in this entire business model, he had made one small mistake. His phone was too easy to get. Biker gangs, drug smugglers, and cartels were using them to communicate, and the FBI, well, they wanted a piece of it. We're going to use his connections and influence in the space to put together the largest sting operation in history, only if they could catch him. Vince was a natural-born salesman, sold everything from satellite cards for watching pirated TV to winning Employee of the Month at one of Canada's largest telecom companies. But the only thing Vince loved more than a sale was his 3 kids and loving wife, whom he'd do anything for. Wanted to give them the world, but to do that, he'd need to get insanely rich. Come 2008, amidst the financial crisis, he decided it was time to finally ditch his job at the big phone company to found his own. Phantom Secure Communications with privacy as its core value. But how was Vince gonna do that? Well, he and his 4-member team would sell BlackBerry phones all over the world, but these BlackBerries were a little changed. They had ripped out the cameras, speakers, and GPS. This way, even if someone broke into them, maybe the government, they couldn't be used to see or hear anything. Then they installed custom email software connected to their servers running in Panama and Hong Kong, and more importantly, these emails were encrypted with PGP. That's pretty good encryption, I'm not joking. This is a real-ass encryption tool, one of the first publicly available. It meant that no third party could read any of the messages, even if they were intercepted. And the price for all this? $2,000 to $3,000 per phone, with an additional monthly subscription fee ranging from $150 to $200. And anyone you wanted to talk to, they also had to buy a phone. The entire system wasn't even super novel, but man, could Vince sell a glass of water to a drowning man. It all started by word of mouth. He was selling it around the Canadian nightlife scene. VIPs, athletes, rappers, businessmen that wanted to keep their contacts secret. Things were going swimmingly, and Phantom Secure was expanding to other countries, but soon it would all go south because in Australia was one of the most notorious drug kingpins, Hakan Ayik, and he loved the thing. Coming from a family with a history of drug abuse, Hakan saw an opportunity in illegal substances, an opportunity to become rich. He spent years fostering connections with Asian triads, corrupt Australian politicians, and smugglers to produce and ship drugs into Australia. Guy had made an entire supply chain from bottom up. A hard task, but when completed, Hakan wasn't just any drug mover. He had founded the Aussie Cartel, a network of 9 top-tier drug traffickers responsible for a third of Australia's drug imports, breaking in over $1 billion annually, hooking the entire country on drugs. Something he wasn't afraid to show off on his Facebook page. You'd find pictures of him driving luxury cars, wearing expensive watches, and partying in private meetings. The only trouble wasn't just the babes looking at his page, it was also the Australian police. They dubbed him the Facebook gangster, and with $1 billion worth of drug imports pointing back to him, he had to leave the country. And what better place to go than Istanbul, Turkey? The thing is, he didn't want to abandon his empire. He wanted to run the damn thing remotely, but his business contacts, well, they weren't silly enough to talk about all this illegal activity over the phone. Hakan needed a solution, and while desperately searching, he found Phantom Secure. It claimed to offer exactly what he needed, so he immediately went out and ordered it. Thanks to Hakan's authority in the drug world, business for the phone was booming. It helped that Australian media kept pushing the stories of drug smugglers busted with these uncrackable phones. It wasn't quite the user base Vince dreamed of, but this rush would bring Phantom Secure $19 million in revenue. And the best part wasn't even illegal. I mean, Apple isn't responsible for what you do on your iPhone, right? But this didn't sit well with law enforcement, who were itching to lock Vince up and destroy his company forever. But since they didn't have a reason to arrest him, they'd have to find something first. There was one more very specific little hidden feature with Phantom's phones. Say you're putting an end to your drug business, need to erase your tracks to avoid jail. Well, Phantom Secure had you covered. Just message them directly, asking them to delete a chat, and they will. No questions asked, no matter what. This meant even deleting chats for criminals, but law enforcement had no proof of that. So around this time that the FBI gets involved, they had just busted Owen Hansen, a former USC football player, for smuggling more than a ton of cocaine from Mexico into the States States, up into Canada, and even down to Australia. It was a long-winded investigation, made harder because Hansen coordinated these shipments using Phantom's phones. The FBI had to plant a damn mole to become Hansen's right-hand man to get access, and they were pissed. But Vince, well, he was Canadian. If they wanted to do anything to Phantom, they had to secure a joint operation. So officials from the San Diego FBI flew up to Vancouver to meet with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Turns out, the RCMP had already been investigating Phantom for years. Estimated their sales had now exceeded $32 million. But they had a problem. There's no legal framework in Canada to do anything about it. But in the US, well, they've got the RICO Act, a law invented to prosecute mafia leaders for organized crime who were rarely committing the actual crimes themselves, just involved in the organization of it. For this reason, the RCMP was eager to join. But actually getting their hands on a phone, well, that was proving challenging. You needed someone who already had one to vouch for you. It took them over 6 attempts. But once they had it, in cooperation with the FBI, they orchestrated the need to wipe their chat. In their request to Phantom, they stated that their drug trafficking partner had been arrested and that they had evidence in that chat that could lead to their own arrest. Phantom Secure workers said no problem, confirmed that they would destroy the evidence of criminal conduct even when they explicitly knew it was happening. But this wasn't enough. What the FBI really wanted was an admission from Vince himself on US soil. See, Phantom's phones were being sold by distributors. Kept Vince's hands clean. It was also a great tactic to make many sales. The FBI's idea was to plan an agent to become a distributor with the goal of developing a close relationship with Vince. They would do this by, well, having their mole inform him of great new business opportunities happening in Las Vegas. We're talking big-time cartel members and drug traffickers that were, allegedly seeking to privatize their business operations. These traffickers were, of course, more undercover agents who just so happened to want to meet Vince to chat about his product in person. It was around this time that a few competitors sprung up. By now, the Blackberries that Phantom was selling were nearly 10 years old, outdated, antiquated, and Phantom's service was, quite frankly, overpriced. He was selling less and less, but Vince liked to spend. He wanted to maintain his luxury lifestyle, and so, according to a Vice article by Joseph Cox, he was willing to sell to anybody. Actually, Joseph Cox wrote the book on this stuff and did the research to uncover almost everything I just told you. Link to his book is in the description below. So now perhaps a little desperate, when his fake distributor told him to come down to Las Vegas to meet with these new clients, he did. In that meeting, they asked him all sorts of pointed questions that, when answered, were very incriminating. And Vince, of course, tried to impress them, listed all the neat features like remotely wiping conversations, using GPS technology to track locations of dealers, and assuring them that the phone was designed specifically for their business and impenetrable to law enforcement. After that meeting, the clients were so impressed that they even bought a subscription from Vince himself. Without even knowing it, he had just sealed his fate. A year later, the FBI plant, who had now been promoted high within Phantom Secure's organization for his apparent ability to sell, was asking Vince to come back down to Las Vegas, this time to watch a UFC match. Even told Vince to bring along his kids and wife. But when Vince checked into the Wynn Hotel nearly 2 hours late and cranked open that door, it wasn't just his now favorite employee waiting for him. A slew of agents from the FBI, RCMP, and AFP stormed him, were searching him for weapons, and then another agent comes up from the background, slips a hand into Vince's pocket, and takes out his Phantom Secure phone, making sure to keep the damn thing on. He had been bamboozled and bad, but Vince, of course, was denying all the allegations. But by the time they brought out receipts, bank transfers, testimonials, and most importantly, undercover footage from him selling services to those undercover agents last year in Las Vegas, Vince knew he was going to jail, and for a long time. And this is when the feds dropped a deal that they'd like to propose. They would let him walk a free man in exchange for a little help. They want to know if it was possible to install a backdoor into Phantom Secure, one which would allow them to read all messages sent by all users. This kicked off a negotiation that would go on for 3 days, a careful game where Vince tried to give them just enough to avoid them just outright tossing him in the slammer, but not enough to outright admit his guilt. Eventually, Vince caved, agreed to work with them to install the backdoor, to go back with the agents to their headquarters in San Diego. At this good news, the lead agent told everyone to take a break, get some rest. This hotel room had literally become their world the last 3 days. But in the middle of the night, night, surrounded by sleeping agents, Vince saw his opportunity, managed to slip out of the room, made a brief pit stop at his wife's room, who was won over. They had been questioning her too, gave her a kiss goodbye, and then snuck through the wind's labyrinth of a basement, calling a friend to pick him up at a nearby strip club. He had to reach the Canadian border, and fast. As early morning hit, he sent a text message to the agents, told them that he was just out for a walk, had to clear his head, that he was going to be back soon. But this was a lie to buy time. He was already on Interstate 5, going as fast as possible. Vince had slipped out from under their noses. 20 hours away from the Canadian border between Washington and Vancouver, there was no fence. He could literally run across and be a free man. He had committed no crimes in Canada. It would take the feds years to secure an extradition request, if even possible, if only he could just make it across. Still speeding on the interstate, Vince begins frantically messaging the executives at his company, warning them about what was going on, but keeping it vague enough to avoid blowing the whole damn thing up if he was able to make it across, was able to get lawyers and turn this whole thing around. The feds were now in a mad dash to track him down. In an ironic twist, the problem Phantom Secure had set out to solve was now being used against him. See, they had taken his laptop during the sting and could see what Wi-Fi networks his personal non-Phantom Secure phone was connecting to. They saw him at a Starbucks, he stayed at a hotel briefly, but this wasn't good enough. They needed to actually get GPS data from the cell carrier, and so they rushed to get a court order to get permission to do that, and it was approved in record time. They could see him moving north fast now. They were calling every local sheriff to try and stop him in his tracks, but then they got their big break. Vince stopped 30 minutes from the Canadian border in Bellingham. Maybe his friend didn't want to take him to the actual crossing, but then they noticed something funny. His Wi-Fi was connected to a breakfast spot. He was waiting for some bacon and eggs. As Vince sat in the corner of the diner, enjoying his first quiet meal in what must have felt like forever, a group of men acting a little too alert for breakfast goers walked in, made their way straight towards Vince. He didn't resist. Back in San Diego, the agents celebrated, but this was just part one. To coincide, they took control of and shut down all Phantom Secure servers, bringing offline countless gangs and crime organizations around the world. Vince was ultimately sentenced to 9 years in prison with a 3-year period of supervised release thereafter, but still, for the feds, this was a bit of a failure. They had seemingly lost their one shot to create the biggest backdoor in history, gain unfiltered access to the internal communication of the world's most sophisticated criminals, or at least they thought they had, because one of Phantom Secure's top distributors had an idea to keep himself out of trouble. He quietly approached the authorities with a new plan, one that could be even more effective than their original plan, an idea that would lead to the creation of a new phone to fill the gap in the market that they had just created. Speaking of abusing private data, let's talk about today's sponsor, Incogni. So I've been using Incogni for over 6 months, and during that time, more and more big data breaches have happened. Like National Public Data, a data broker that had billions of records, including social security numbers, leaked to the website Breach Forums by a threat actor called US DoD. You might remember him from my video on the hacker who can never visit a playground again. He's since been arrested, by the way, but it's too late. Those social security numbers are out there, and that's why I hate the data broker industry and its appalling lack of regulations around selling my personal information. Like, number one, once they've been hacked and it's leaked online, it's too late. It can be abused by people like Julius Kivamaki, who I covered for ransoming people with their leaked therapy records. Then number two, they're collecting and selling my personal information to the highest bidder. Bidders that want to spam my phone, send me junk mail, or perhaps stalk me. Seriously, have you ever seen those people search websites? Anyone can get on those. This is where Incogni steps in. They request on your behalf using data privacy laws that brokers remove your information. Then they follow up and keep insisting. They do this constantly, year round, and that's so important because there's this constant churn of new data coming in. You can do this by yourself, by the way. Incogni's blog has steps to do it, but there's hundreds of brokers and they make it as hard as possible. Look, it takes 9 steps to get off white pages, including taking a phone call from them. These brokers are not your friends. That's why I let Incogni do all the heavy lifting. I've signed up, now I do nothing else except look at their pretty stats dashboard to see all of their hard work. Since using Incogni, I'm getting way less spam phone calls, and I'm not so worried about someone stealing my identity, opening up loans or credit cards, and I'm not so worried about people stalking me. I get some really bizarre emails despite no one even knowing what I look like. So if you're ready to take your personal data back, go to incogni.com/crumb and use promo code crumb to get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/crumb, code crumb. An amazing deal by an amazing company. Thank you, Incogni. I would say meet Afgoo, but we can't because the FBI has gone to great lengths to protect his identity. We don't know his real name, don't have a picture of him. What we do know is that he was a big-time distributor for Phantom, was close to big criminals like Hakan, but what was special about him is that he had a technical background. He could explain what Phantom was in a way that legitimized it. Afgoo had planned on becoming a competitor, had been secretly working on his own encrypted phone while selling for Vince, but when he found out that Vince was behind bars, his future wasn't looking too bright. The feds were already tracking down other distributors, and so in a leap of faith, he had his lawyer reach out to the FBI attempting to strike a deal. His offer was simple. He would develop a new version of Phantom Secure with a real-time backdoor into the criminal's communications. Little did he know this is the exact idea feds had been drooling over from the very start. And so it was settled. They struck a deal. The FBI was going to start a tech company, putting Afgoo, a guy who they were literally going to arrest, at the helm of the entire thing. The name of this new phone? Anom. And come late 2018, Afgoo got to work using the FBI's budget, set up a fake company, hired a bunch of contractors to develop the thing. They were told that they were developing a product for big corporations that wanted to keep their internal communications secret. Of course, that was a lie, but it worked. They had to keep this thing well under wraps. Truth be told, the first version of the phone was apparently hot garbage. Chunks of the code were literally copy and paste it from other messaging apps. It was a huge mess, but it worked. They had taken Google Pixels and made them load a custom operating system called Arcane. This housed a very special calculator app that when you enter in your special PIN, the Anom app would load. This was essentially a ripoff of WhatsApp. It offered real-time instant messages, which was a huge step up from Phantom. I mean, criminals previously were using basically a glorified email system, so to be able to send in real time was a breakthrough of its own, but Anom also let them take photos and videos. On top of that, they included a bunch of bells and whistles like message delete timers, a customer support that you could contact to erase all your tracks, a button to nuke all your contacts. Like, the only feature that they weren't advertising here is that all of this was being sent directly back to the FBI. They could see every photo, every video, every message. You try to nuke everything, it would just hide it for you and tell the FBI that you were in a mad panic. To top it off, they created a custom panel that would let other police enforcement agencies read everything Anom was collecting. It was time for them to launch the phones, but for that to happen, they needed clients, and a lot of them. Thankfully, Afgoo wasn't just a tech genius, but a man with some serious connections in the criminal world. Meet Domenico Catanzarati, heir to a family of olive oil producers. But behind that smile is a long list of drug-related crimes, from owning meth labs to trafficking large shipments of cocaine. So naturally, he was exactly the kind of client Anom was looking for. The collapse of Phantom Secure had hit him hard. His business depended on it. So when Afgoo handed him 5 Anom phones free of charge, Domenico didn't hesitate. Trust wasn't an issue. I mean, Afgoo was the one that introduced him to Phantom Secure in the first place. Now, Afgoo told him, look, give these phones away to your associates, sell them for a subscription fee, I don't care. The FBI was operating like a true tech startup here. They were willing to give their new product away for free just to attract the first clients. And this was a great decision because Domenico had he knew mafia that was connected to the Australian drug trade. And so before the FBI knew it, phones were lighting up left and right in Australia, capturing hundreds of incriminating messages. Seeing this scheme as a success, the FBI quickly contracted a Hong Kong factory to produce a bunch more phones, and they were passing them back to Domenico as fast as he could get rid of them. By the summer of 2019, just 8 months into the test, Anom's user base was growing exponentially. All the cool criminals in Australia had an Anom phone. The Comancheros even had their own group chat called Get It Done. But the FBI's real plan was to essentially wiretap the entire world. Just Australia wasn't gonna cut it. And their next target, they wanted to do all of Europe, where cocaine trade was expanding at alarming rates. But the FBI had just one little problem. They still didn't have legal access to read the messages collected with Anom. While they were pretty confident that they could figure it out with Australia and New Zealand, the agents really needed a volunteer among the European Union to help them out. And that volunteer would end up being Lithuania, who granted them a covert court order, essentially letting them wiretap all of Europe. And with this, they were officially off to the races. The FBI now had a foundation to run on, a foundation that they would call Operation Trojan Shield. But as this thing grew in size, it was going to get harder and harder to keep under wraps. As Anom phones gained popularity, it wasn't just criminals getting their hands on them. Innocent people were too, mainly to chat with secret lovers. So the agents who were tasked with monitoring all these incoming messages were now sifting through intimate conversations and explicit pictures. Yet for the agents, spying on any Anom user was fair game. The phone was designed and marketed specifically for criminals, so owning one made you a target, even if you just wanted privacy, even if it was for completely legitimate reasons, which that's pretty questionable. Curious about your thoughts on that in the comments. Of course, they were kind of trying to avoid wiretapping innocent citizens, especially attorneys, but wasn't so easy with the amount of distributors now selling the thing. The hardest part, however, was knowing when to intervene. Agents often allowed drug deals and shipments to play out for the sake of gathering intel, but things got trickier when there was real threats to life. Agents could see everything, like plans for hits, explosives, even execution videos. When lives were at risk, they were sometimes forced to act, but they didn't want to tip the criminals off that their damn phones were compromised. That would jeopardize the entire operation. And so one of the tactics they employed to avoid raising suspicion is sending anonymous tips to local law enforcement agencies. And fortunately, criminals rarely blame their phones. Instead, they would turn on each other, thinking they had moles within their organization, which actually inadvertently led to more violence. For Anom, the world was truly their oyster at this point. The only problem is there was a few competitors and they wanted to run them out of business. They wanted all the criminals on their honeypot. It's at this point that Afgoo approaches an old friend, someone that he used to sell phantom secure phones with. That's right, it's the Facebook gangster. Hakan is back, and he had already been using Anom for a while, found it all on his own. So when Afgoo asked him to be a distributor, he didn't hesitate at all. Now here's the thing about Hakan. He's got a big ego. I mean, look at the guy. He started to present himself as the CEO of Anom to prospecting buyers. The FBI, Afgoo, the real CEO, played along. They needed him. This was actually a good thing. He was ruthless yet professional. His influence in the criminal world was undeniable. This was the perfect fake CEO for the company. And with this, it was truly off to the races. It's at this point that Anom starts introducing even more new features. Voice scramblers, secure file vaults, the ability to pixelate and distort images before sending them. And as always, Big Brother was still watching everything, unscrambled, unedited, and fully accessible. Anom was doing well, but a lucky streak was about to cripple them. See, Anom had to compete with two really big players in the market, EncroChat and Sky Global. After 5 years of relentless advertising, EncroChat had amassed 60,000 users, 90% of them linked to organized crime. But come June 2020, news broke that their infrastructure had been hacked by French police. They had been reading all messages for nearly 3 months. EncroChat's admins had noticed far too late. Millions of messages had already been collected. EncroChat sent a panicked message out to all users: wipe your phones, throw them away, but the damage was done. There were over 6,000 arrests worldwide, with 197 of those being high-value targets. 900 million euros was confiscated or frozen by police. This sent a shockwave through the criminal world. They needed a new secure phone provider. Some went to Sky Global, but to the FBI's luck, Anom was the first choice. Overnight, Anom's user base doubled, and to make the numbers even more favorable, Anom was slowly conquering all of Europe with a new main man. So Hakan used this opportunity to partner with a big-time drug trafficker in Sweden, Maximilian Rivikin, better known as Microsoft. Microsoft was one of the many affected by EncroChat's hack, had to flee from Sweden, but he had a problem. Without a secure phone provider, how would he run his empire remotely? This is when Hakan invited him to Istanbul to check out the Anom phone. Needless to say, Microsoft was sold. Soon, they were pushing Anom to all of Northern Europe and making a crap load of money doing it. So much that they opened up an Anom office with a big LED logo. Here's Microsoft posing next to it. Remember, Hakan's still faking being the CEO. Can only imagine what the FBI thought when they saw this picture. Now, these two goobers realized that the only thing standing in their way from making more money than they could ever dream of was Sky Global. Sky Global had 171,000 registered devices since their inception in 2008, and they wanted those users. But they had to position themselves correctly, and they knew just the way to do that. See, a Sky subscription costs between 1,000 and 2,000 smackaroos a month. So Hakan and Microsoft decide to hire a bunch of resellers to undercut the hell out of Sky. They start peddling Anom phones for $600 a pop, and it worked. The FBI couldn't be any happier. This newfound user base, even Sweden, among many other European countries, joined operation with the FBI to read the Anom messages and prevent crime. Under one rule: do not use Anom messages as evidence. It must remain a secret. A secret that was getting harder and harder to keep as the FBI had been mobilizing more agents to analyze the fire hose of messages now coming in. By March 2021, Belgian police began a sweeping crackdown. Nearly 200 raids resulting in 48 arrests, with the seizure of over 1.2 million euros and 117 tons of cocaine. The common thread among all those apprehended, they were using Sky Global. Sky Global was of course denying rumors that the Dutch police had backdoored their platform to read user messages in real time, but the damage was done. Sky was too risky to use. Criminals had no other choice but to turn to Anom. And to say that Anom struggled to keep up with the demand would be an understatement. New users were flooding in from all over the world, and distributors were making a fortune selling phones. The gold rush was so intense that the FBI ran out of Google Pixels, forcing them to purchase other phones in bulk just to meet the overwhelming demand. Distributors were raking in millions, but the feds, they had another problem. These phones were now in the hands of US citizens, more than ever. And the FBI, well, they weren't authorized to spy on Americans. Under the Fourth Amendment, Americans are protected against unreasonable searches and seizures, meaning federal agents would need a search warrant or wiretap order to monitor their communications. Now, the important thing here is that the Constitution only applies to US citizens, so that's why the rest of the world was fair game, but in the US, things were different. The FBI had tried. They submitted a request to the Office of Enforcement Operations, OEO, the division of the Department of Justice, which is responsible for all US wiretaps, but the OEO had sat on this request for months with no answer. It was clear that there was a split between the aggressive agents on the Anom case, eager to expand their operation, and the higher-ups in the DOJ who were more cautious. Despite this, without domestic surveillance rights, Anom had pushed forward, the agents allegedly avoiding monitoring communications coming from US citizens, but they knew they were playing a dangerous game. By 2021, the number of devices was registered at 11,800, with 9,000 of them in active use. Each member's data read, stored, and secured on the FBI's servers. Anom was now the biggest network for criminals in existence. What started as several agents keeping tabs on less than 100 users have become an actual office space with over 130 agents reading 1 million messages in 45 different languages a day. Sooner or later, something was going to slip and the criminals would figure out what Anom actually was. The feds knew that this house of cards was already getting pretty weak. They needed an exit plan, but one that would give them the most bang for their buck. They wanted to initiate a mass arrest, capture as many criminals as possible at the same time. Not only that, the FBI wanted to make an example out of Anom. Come out and declare, yes, it was us all along, and you were none the wiser, shuttering criminals' sense of security and trust in any technology that they might use in the future. And so the date for the exit was selected, June 8th, 2021, the same day that Lithuania's court order allowing the FBI to gather messages in Europe was set to expire. 9,000. That's how many police officers were gearing up to participate in what was dubbed the Joint Action Day, with each individual target being assigned to an agency close to them. They quickly built cases, combining messages with other evidence to ensure successful prosecutions for everyone they arrested. But the FBI made their own separate list, reserved for the people who they had hired to push Anom. Hakan and Microsoft were of course at the top of that list. The biggest challenge they faced now was they didn't want any of the criminals getting an early heads up, so the plan was to follow the sun. The Australian authorities kicked off the chain, started arresting people in the middle of the night. Then law enforcement in Europe woke up early in the morning, started rushing criminal homes and hideouts, hoping to catch them while they're still sleeping. Finally, the day was closed in the US by them making a big reveal, a 51-minute long news conference detailing how they tricked thousands of criminals into using their fake encrypted device. With over 500 arrests in a less than 48-hour period, this marked the single largest law enforcement sting in history. In numbers, that sounds even more impressive. 40 tons of drugs, 300 guns, 55 luxury cars, and more than 48 million in various currencies seized. For the agents back in San Diego, who had started it all, it was a huge success. In the following months, the total arrest exceeded 1,000, including a yacht carrying 2 tons of cocaine. As for Microsoft, following the Action Day, he was indicted for drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder, but has since remained at large. They don't know if he's still in Turkey or what, but the US and Swedish law enforcement have placed a $5 million bounty on him, so if you see him around. Things didn't work out so well for Hakan though, so he remained untouchable for nearly 2.5 years, despite being the first one named in the indictment presented by the US authorities. Turkey didn't have any reason to arrest him. However, eventually Australia worked out a deal with them, and in a joint operation called Operation Cage, police forces in Turkey arrested 37 people heavily involved in drug-related crimes, including Hakan himself. Here he is sitting on the floor with his hands behind his back. He faces up to 20 years in prison. As for Afgoo, he remains anonymous, protected by the feds for his cooperation. He was paid $120,000 for his work. Perhaps he's already creating the next honeypot for the feds if it isn't in your pocket already.